If you follow me on Twitter, which admittedly not many people do, you know that I have a history of being fairly critical with the booking of AEW's women's division, an abundance of shoving every single women's segment into the same quarter hour. However, finally reached its boiling point a few months back in a press conference when Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful reported the following. Tony Khan says he strongly disagrees with the criticism of Thunder Rosa versus CM Punk's promo time for their title situation. He says, if we're speaking honestly, an 8-minute promo with CM Punk is going to draw more than an 8-minute Thunder Rosa promo, and that's what he booked for. This ideology is ignorant and misguided in many ways. It's indicative of the state of AEW's women's division. The argument that women aren't a draw, so he doesn't book them, completely falls apart when you remember that this is pro wrestling. MJF wasn't a draw when he first walked into the company, and wouldn't be today if you didn't book him because he wasn't a draw. That sort of circular logic, this self-fulfilling prophecy that we don't book people who aren't draws, creates a situation where nobody can become draws. And you're just stuck with the same main event talent that you're relying on. And what happens when one of them decides to slag off your company and punch one of the owners in the face? Ricky Starks, The Acclaimed, hell, even Hangman Page, none of these wrestlers were massive draws when they first arrived to AEW. Hangman took months to get over with the audience after his loss to Jericho. The women not being a draw is a problem of Tony Khan's own making, and blaming the women for his own shortcomings and successfully booking them. A big problem with AEW's women's division is that it just feels like Tony Khan doesn't care. Perhaps the biggest and most blatant example of this is what I like to call the obligatory women's quarter hour. Picture this, it's about 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time style, and boom, suddenly you get a Jade Cargill promo. She says she's that bitch, you know, the works. And then we get a women's match. Maybe Toni Storm versus The Bunny or Penelope Ford. It goes maybe 10 minutes if we're lucky, more than likely probably about 7 or 8. Then after that, you maybe get one more promo, probably Britt Baker addressing Saraya, and then we're back to the men, and only the men. By 9:15, it was as if no women had ever appeared on the show. Week after week this happens, to the point where it's astonishing that Tony Khan doesn't even try to hide it. Relegating all your women's segments to the statistical lowest rated quarter hour of your show, more weeks than not, is 2014 WWE Divas division levels of poor booking. Sure, the matches are better because the talent is better, but the fact that Tony Khan is trying to hide all his women in a single 15-minute segment and wait for them to finish to put the real stars on for the openers and the closers shows that he clearly views the women's division as more of an obligation than a division. Of course there are exceptions. Thunder Rosa versus Britt Baker, Britt versus Ruby, but every time this happens, and it feels like we're actually going somewhere, we get Sky Blue versus Marina Shafir in a 2-minute 53-second match as the only women's match on the card for the entire week. There's absolutely no argument to be made that that should be the only women's match on an entire show. AEW's women's division's big problem has never been the women. Even in the beginning, when the argument that their division wasn't deep enough was semi-valid, they still had enough talent to support a single title. Big Swole, Emi Sakura, Riho, Nyla Rose, Yuka Sakazaki, Hikaru Shida, Britt Baker alone are plenty enough talent to support a single title in the division. And today, even if you want to use the argument that their roster somehow isn't deep enough after all the signings to support their titles, the answer is to simply not have 3 women's championships to populate it. AEW has 3 women's championships, 4 if you include Thunder Rosa still. Who remembers that Mercedes Martinez is the ROH Women's World Champion? I certainly didn't until writing this because she hasn't been on TV since Death Before Dishonor in June. he had plenty of time to book her on TV the same way that he booked the men's ROH championship on TV multiple weeks in a row and being defended. I'd like to say that there's this big idea that AEW can use to reinvigorate their roster, maybe a new signing or something, but the answer isn't that interesting. Just look at the men, book the women like them. Look at WWE. Even before Triple H took over, when WWE creative and morale was at one of its all-time lows, Becky Lynch and Asuka were still putting on bangers in the main event multiple weeks in a row, and they had precisely 0 titles between them. And yet AEW struggles to divide their single women's segment per show amongst the only 2 stars that they've been able to create. One of them isn't even their top champion. It feels like instead of taking inspiration from how WWE's women's division is booked today, they're taking inspiration from how WWE's women's division was booked in 2015. I'm not even entirely joking. So they even did a segment with Paige that was incredibly close to the segment where Stephanie McMahon said that we need a revolution. Like, look at them side by side. They're eerily alike, practically admitting to your audience that, yeah, we fucked this whole thing up. And then not fixing the issue is not the way to go. There was still only 1 women's match of that show. How do you fuck up wrestling that bad? It's not that hard. Granted, by no means is WWE's historical standard of booking their women good, but in the past few years, there's an argument that they have, if not the most talented women's roster in the world, definitely the most utilized women's roster. On TV, as of April 2022, the women's division only accounted for 23% of the matches on the show. Statistically, they are far less utilized than the men. Granted, there are more men on the roster, but according to AEW's own active roster page, the amount of women actually signed to the division make up almost 30% of the roster, and this isn't taking into account unsigned talent. There is a statistical unbalance there, not just the women's roster not being deep enough. And this isn't even taking into account that, yes, they accounted for 23% of the matches, but the match time is nowhere near close. There is no objective mathematical argument for the women only having the amount of time that they have. The numbers don't lie, and they do spell disaster for Tony Khan and Sacrifice. The problem with AEW's women's division, simply put, is a disproportionate lack of opportunity and screen time for their female wrestlers. AEW, or more specifically Tony Khan's unwillingness to take a chance and invest TV time and effort into them, creates a women's division that is lambasted on Twitter, rightly so. The majority of AEW's efforts goes into already established talent on TV, and yes, while that's given them the spotlight they have now, it's also hindering their ability to grow. It's proven that the guys who aren't necessarily the most mainstream draws can massively get over if you just invest a little more TV time into them every single week. Look at the Acclaimed, who are objectively the most popular act in the company, if not all of wrestling right now, who started as a thrown together tag team on Dark. The fact is, it doesn't matter how many times Saraya comes on screen and says there's gonna be a difference for this division if they don't actually make a difference for the division. And as their women's roster continues to grow, the bottleneck of the obligatory women's square hour will only grow more apparent with it and make your division feel less important. AEW has to make the large structural changes in how they book their shows, or their women's division is going to continue to be an easy target for them at a time where they have enough bad press and publicity on their back. Now is the time to pull the trigger. With all the suspensions and injuries hindering the star power on the show, now would be the perfect time to invest those spots that would have gone to the Elite or CM Punk into multiple women's matches, rebuild Nyla Rose and Rhea Shida, for the love of God, Jamie Hayter, who the fans are white hot for right now. Actually progress her feud with Britt Baker instead of constantly doing the, ooh, we're gonna break up, just kidding bullshit that they've been pulling for over a year now. Do all of this on top of having Saraya feud with Britt Baker and have Toni Storm consistently defending her title on TV. All of this can happen and coexist on the same episode. So, Tony Khan, if for some reason, some way, somehow you're watching this, and you made it all the way through to the end of this video, please, I'm begging you, just give us 2 matches on your next show, a half an hour, and consistently build it up. I promise in the long run, it will do a lot for not only the division, but the company. Because the problem with AEW's women's division isn't the women. It's the time. Thank you for making it all the way through the end of the video. This is an idea that I've been working on for a couple months now, kicking around in one way or another, and I'm only now getting around to actually making a thing. So, yeah, if you guys like it, then I might make more. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a while, so if you enjoyed it, you know, share it on Twitter, share it to your friends who like wrestling. You can follow me on Twitter at Grapaholics, but you know, Twitter is kind of a hellscape right now, so I understand if you wouldn't want to do that. But yeah, you can also follow me on TikTok at Grapaholics, and I hope you enjoyed the video.